This is Chapter 8 of the Bubble Bath Paradox by Steve Parker. Faithing. "Paul!" exclaimed a too familiar voice from our couch. "Are you all right?" It was Carol. "Carol?" stammered Paul. "What are you doing here? How did you get in?" "Yeah, Paul," I wanted to say. "What is she doing here?" "I saw you on the video feed, Paul. I wanted to make sure you were okay." "I am fine," replied Paul a little nervously. "And how did you get into my apartment?" "Bob coded my biometrics in a while ago." "Right," said Paul, glancing at me nervously. "He would have done that. Well, I am fine, but we need to clean up and change. Meet you at the union later. I'll call." "Okay," said Carol with a tinge of hurt in her voice. "Don't take too long." "Of course not," said Paul as he ushered her to the door. At the door she made to kiss him, and he turned his head slightly so she only caught his cheek. She reached her arm around him and waved. "Bye, Bob," she called out. "Glad you are okay, too." "Bye," Paul and I said in unison as he shut the door behind her. "You really need to tell me when you add people to the apartment's biometric scanner," said Paul as he strode back and collapsed onto the sofa. "Yeah, I guess so," I replied, "and it would be nice to know why Carol was here to see you. I'm feeling awkward and jealous and weird. I just had a murderous time-traveling bubble destroy everything I've been working with, and probably my career too, and maybe destroyed all of reality as a bonus. And if that's not enough, weirdness for the entire population of a rather densely populated planet, Carol keeps showing up to prevent my becoming friends with my parasympathetic nervous system." I sat down on the sofa and felt suddenly very tired. "Keeps showing up?" asked Paul. "Yeah. She helped me start the day with a bodycom light show recreation of some compilation of erotic encounters with Peter," I sighed, "at my lab. It was my dawn surprise." "Well, okay. I think I should explain, Carol, at least my part. I have no desire to even know about Peter's activity." Paul adjusted his shoulders as if the reply to my unspoken question required additional focus. "But I'm not sure you will be all that comfortable with why I think Carol was here, or what I'm fairly sure is the reason." "Okay," I said. "Well, you know about the Aeroborgs," he said. "Of course, they're all over my apartment," I replied. "Almost every man and woman on campus, faculty, staff, students, and parents of students have direct, intimate experience with your Aeroborgs. Yeah, the original version I cooked up here. They are fun." He motioned to our kitchen. "But I've been working with the liberated targeting units and have a brand new version. It is fully sentient. Not human level, but smarter than a dog, and unfortunately with all the bonding acumen of a super cute puppy, and then some." "So you gave my ex a puppy sex toy?" I asked. No, much more than that." He wasn't looking at me, but I could tell from his voice that his eyes had gone wild and misty. "They are so much more than that. I actually used the targeting globes to emotionally bind the Aeroborgs to their intended recipient. Imagine a sex toy that becomes emotionally bonded to the user. You used to have to get into some horrid relationship with a student athlete or aspiring actor to get that sort of service. With the Aeroborgs, you get all this without bruising your morals or trashing your self-esteem." "Sounds great," I said. Why would that make me uncomfortable?" "Well, the adjustment of the targeting lobes is rather intimate." He audibly blushed. "I need to work on a training system that is less hands-on." "Oh," I replied. "Did she come here for more, what do you call it anyway? Target training?" "No, not at all," demanded Paul. "The bonding level is the ongoing problem. It apparently won't let anyone but me near her. I gave her a hypnotic device to get it to sleep for short periods of time. Otherwise, she wouldn't have even been able to take the transit over here." "The device must have worked. As the super awkward dawn light show suggested all kinds of antics with Peter, I mumbled. I don't think that's possible. The Aeroborgs would sense her arousal, mused Paul as he walked over to the living room wall monitor. I told her I was working on a better solution days ago, but I've not got it working yet. He switched on the monitor and flipped through something that looked an awful like a flesh-covered trombone. Do you see anything like this in the light show? He asked. Everything was in shadow and disco lights, I said. Not much definition, but yeah, I may have seen something like that. I thought it was Peter's penis and part of his thigh. Peter's not nearly that big, said Paul cattishly. Carol specifically said she wanted something more adequate from the Aeroborg. She had to tell me in detail, even though she entered everything I needed to know about what she wanted on the specification sheet. Something about the long-term effect of hallucinogenic honey or something may have changed Peter. Hearing it was a mixture of awkward and a little interesting. Peter is kind of a self-important bore, after all, if you hadn't noticed. My mind went back to this morning's encounter with Carol and Peter, and then there were the looped recordings of it on all the monitors of the setup. Was it something other than a coupling of Peter and Carol? What would the Aeroborg do if Peter got too intimate with Carol after it was bonded? I asked tentatively, quite sure that I didn't want to know, but knowing I sort of had to at this point. I'm not sure, mused Paul, but it would be vicious and nasty and unsanitary. It might even involve excretion of a foul-smelling liquid, one that smelled like a concentrated mixture of bird poop and rotting fish. Oh, I replied, rather dumbfounded. Yeah, said Paul mistily. I really need to figure out how to program that out of them. Some of them have teeth. Oh, I replied. Sharp teeth, said Paul, that are tipped with toxic stingers. Nasty. Given the rather stunned look on your face, added Paul, I'm surprised Peter isn't hospitalized. Stinger teeth, I asked. Not the best feature for a sex toy. No, it's not. That might be the reason I saw them at the lab this morning, then, I suggested. Peter has a few specialized medibots that his pharmaceutical partners donated to him. I think they're programmed to repair and detoxify bee stings. Apparently, there's a problem with collecting hallucinogenic honey. Those medibots of his are probably better than anything the local hospital would have. Certainly about 10 times the cost, said Paul in a way that suggested he might ask to borrow one. Paul switched the feed for the living room wall monitor to a news feed channel. The explanation for Carol's visit was over. And there I was again, now on my living room wall, gurgling and pathetic. Yay. How bad is it, Bob? Asked Paul, with the sound of changed subject in his voice as he turned to me. It is not just a collapsed building, is it? No, I answered. Reality may have been irrevocably damaged. I don't know, though. It is important that we find out how Donald and Tiffany are doing. They came out of the past, and if they are not disintegrating, then we may have a chance. It may not even be a good chance, but if they are dissolving or something, then we may be in serious trouble. If you insist on not making sense, said Paul sternly, I would prefer it if you were a little less depressing about it. The monitor was showing more of what we had seen over pasta. It wasn't showing much about the Trumps. The Trumps' attention bubble was not popping, but it was changing. If you took into account all the people who had conglomerated onto them, then their bubble was gaining mass at an alarming rate. They had become a rapidly swelling, ill-defined problem that needed a solution. Amalgamated to the pair were those out people who wanted to define the problem that they were, and those that wanted to solve it in spite of any ambiguities. There were creepy, quiet aid minister representatives who simply wished that they did not exist, and that the entire event had never happened. And these aid ministers could probably make it so something or someone never happened. There were also several representatives of IBAD, Immigration and Biometric Accountability Database Administrator Group, who wanted them to go away and were hoping to find a reason to send them to one of the Gnostic states. The initial newsfeed interviews had gotten their fill, and then some. Those that had already looked up the hate speech the Trumps had brought with them from the latter half of the 21st century were finding reasons not to return for follow-up questions. Several of the others were warned by their colleagues in the press against wading into the moral sewage the Trumps were trying to stir up and had quietly dropped their stories. Actual time travelers should have been the biggest story of all time, but despite the event itself being a big story, the two people who had actually walked out of the past remained obscure. I only saw the initial interviews on low, dim video. It was still enough to capture the event in enough detail to satisfy all of my curiosity and then some. What happened after the press had all but abandoned them was more interesting and was happening as Paul explained the problems with his advanced aerobargs to me. I would eventually see it from several angles on a rather raw stream, multi-dim recording. Donald had been plucked mid-sermon from the past and put into a future that was not shockingly different from his own time. At least it didn't look to be so very different to him right away. He thought for a while, even as the response droids appeared, that people were just playing some costume farce. It took a while to convince him otherwise. He transitioned from blessing the collection plates to preaching his version of morality with only a slight pause, caused by the temporary destruction of the building he was in and Jane's nerd ninjas with their big guns. "Son," he said, putting his hand on one of the attending response droids, "Jesus can find you, no matter how silly you dress. Have you felt Jesus inside of you? Have you felt his love? He loves you. Did you know that, son? Jesus loves you. I am not carrying anyone at this time. Is Jesus in need of assistance? Our information indicates that there are no humans currently alive in the structure. There are several tissue matches indicating severe trauma of an unknown origin. We are currently attempting identification, but have no conclusive contemporary matches." The bot was using its most comforting voice. It was impressive. "If you can provide biometric data for Jesus, we can attempt to identify her in the unknown samples." Another droid circled in on Donald and touched him with an appendage. "I'm sure Jesus is okay. We are just having a little trouble making identifications right now. We have identified a data glitch that could be responsible. We are looking for your friend." The victim empathy haptic and that voice, I felt calmed into wanting a nap just watching the feed. I knew the contact appendage would be flooding Donald with calming neurotransmitters. He started to smile in a woozy way. The comforting algorithms were designed to provide more of an empathetic connection than a human ever could, and they were very good. Donald could not tell that they were non-human. I suppose that if one dressed a human up in a globular protective suit so that they looked like a response droid, most people would insist that they were less human than the actual droids. Donald, of course, thought that they were human because he had no experience with any medical robots. The medical technology of the post-rewrite had a lot more similarities to the early 20th century than the early 21st century, similar to the Gnostic states. Donald was sure they were college students making fun of him. To him, it had only been a few years since he stood around on university campuses with a sign announcing the coming wrath of his God. The memories of the insults hurled at him would not have stung any less if he had fully comprehended that it had been closer to 60 years. His annoyance developed into a blooming, petulant tantrum despite the calming haptics. "You are fornicators," he demanded. "Evangelizers of sodomy! Don't touch my wife!" Another set of response droids were comforting Tiffany. She was much more receptive. They were blowing warm, moist air onto her and carefully vacuuming the dust off her. They had begun a conversation about almost nothing with her. She was smiling contentedly. A human had brought in recliner carts for the droids to coax Donald and Tiffany onto. The biomonitors the droids had placed on the two time travelers showed the extremely different responses of the two. Tiffany was so pleased to lie down that she registered as slightly excited. Donald flew into a paranoid frenzy. "You homosexual fascist sodomites! You will not take me to your orgies! You will burn in hell for your abominations!" His heart rate was redlining on the monitor. "Please calm down," said the empath droids as they rolled back, and a public safety device stepped up to Donald and pushed a blue box against his head. Donald's heart rate instantly dropped to 40 BPM, but you could tell by his neurotransmitter levels that he was fighting to remain agitated. His eyes rolled into the top of his head and he lapsed into glossolia. "Ya di 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 go sapa, ti ta 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 di 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 sampa, ta 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 di 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 yagam ram dara ta 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 di di golama ta ta di tam ta ta gili ta di ham ta ta tom goli samparata." Donald was fighting against the calming agent so hard drool was leaking out of his mouth and forming sprays of spit every time his random syllables caused his lips to purse a bit. "Yam bala di pa gala sam o bala fa da ti di bat ya hamaga atara fa da ta pa di ta 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 ga ha ga." In an instant, the people and the droids closest to Donald backed away one full pace. At the same time, foam sprayed from someplace out of the video's field of view. Donald's arms and legs were instantly immobilized by the solidifying mass. Riot droids I had not seen in the room jumped in and wrapped Donald in clear film. Then they picked him up and, in the same fluid motion, placed him gently but very quickly onto the empty recliner cart. The monitor showed that Donald was struggling against the body-bind foam as hard as he could. You could also see it in his eyes. He was absolutely still except for his face. His eyes were wide, and he had stopped speaking in tongues for the split second it took to immobilize him. Then he started again, but louder. "Di di ta pa 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 di gata halta faz ka gata ta ra ta 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 pa di pa pa no to di ta 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 sam pa pa ti di halara ga ga fa tra ra ta di pa." Medical personnel on telepresence units began hurriedly consulting. None of the medical personnel, human or AI, had experience with a seizure like this. They consulted as a stronger dose of calming agent almost won over Donald's physiology and turned down the volume of his glossolalia. The decision was made to sedate him and turn the noise off completely. When he quieted down to where he was simply mumbling incoherently, the sedative worked instantly, but since he was totally immobilized by the hardened foam, the only visible sign of the sedative working, besides the end of the mumbled gibberish, was Donald's eyes glazing over and a slackening in his face. A life support unit was brought in, and tubes snaked their way into each of his orifices. The biomonitoring output became much more complex as more subtle physiological metrics were recorded. The IBAD folks were being diligently annoying about the whole thing. Once Donald was contained, they insisted on several brain scans in order to prove Donald was not faked. The IBAD agents were the only ones who had ever heard anyone with any kind of glossolalia, and the only individuals with whom they had experience with anything remotely similar to Donald's style of psychosis were people from the Gnostic states who had their brains faked as children. The IBAD theory about what had happened was actually the best-sounding one being presented at the time. They proposed that two faked terrorists from one of the Middle Eastern Gnostic states had attempted to steal the valuable cross artifact and had accidentally set off some kind of disruption weapon they had brought in. The weapon had killed all the terrorists but two, by mistake, hence all the blood and severed arms, and taken down the museum building. The setup for time sampling and the disappearance of so much of the apparatus for it was purely coincidental. No impossible time travel, no destruction of reality. Simple. Not a bad theory. Unfortunately, the Trumps had actually stepped out of the past into the now. Faithing apparatuses did not exist in the time they had come from. They were the singular technological achievement that the Gnostic states had developed since they had been established. The Faithers were, by all accounts I have read, horrible Stone Age torture devices. Their use was fully in line with the symbolic ancient torture device replicas that many Gnostic state citizens and the Trumps decorated themselves with. Because the iBod theory made sense, the situation had suddenly become a military event. The news feeds were full of weapons holding IBAD and other alphabet soup uniformed military personnel describing what they were discovering about the attack. There apparently was a lot of chatter about the attack and possible additional targets. You've been listening to Chapter 8 of the Bubble Bath Paradox, written and read by Steve Parker, with music by the incredible Victor McSurley.